Welcome to the Healthy Pickleballer podcast. I'm your host, Brian Lee. In today's episode, I'm joined by Dr. Richard Trammel. Dr. Trammel is a sports psychologist and owner of Level 3 Sports Psychology in Birmingham, Alabama. And today he's going to be talking with us on things that you can do to overcome some of those mental blocks that can affect your performance on the pickleball court. Dr. Trammel, thank you for taking the time to come on. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about the role that a sports psychologist plays in helping athletes?
Well, thank you, Brian. And yes, sports psychology is similar to regular therapy that people would go to, except that it is designed specifically for athletes. So, in the past, and perhaps even today a little bit, there is a stigma involved around going to see a psychologist, because one of the things that people that don't know anything about therapy is people, well, I didn't realize you were crazy. I didn't understand that you had a mental illness. And so that's not what therapy is. And it certainly is not what sports psychology is. And so sports psychology is really the art and the science of helping an athlete overcome what I call situational anxiety. In other words, they get nervous in a tournament environment, and yet in practice, they can do anything. They're totally free to do anything they want to do in practice. And so there's an old adage in the game of golf that I think applies to most sports, is that the harder I try, the worse I do. And so this is it's an irony that brings people eventually to me. Unfortunately, I get them when they're at the very end of the rope. But sports psychologists that work with the Olympics and Olympians, they're with them at the very beginning. And they have been with the Olympic athletes for decades. But now sports psychology is just now seemingly seeping its way into the mindset of the average athlete, the average parent, and high school, college now, because it's becoming more mainstream. But there have been sports psychologists that have worked in Colorado Springs for decades now. So now it is just becoming more mainstream.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited for our listeners to hear your message because I do think that this is an aspect of performance that not enough people have tapped into, especially at that recreational and even the youth level athlete. Yeah, I think professional players, as you kind of talked about, they're looking for every advantage that they can get, and it's almost like a must for them if they're looking to gain that 2 to 3% advantage over their competition. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say today.
Yes, and you're absolutely right in that the professional athlete, their margins of improvement are so narrow that they have to look under every stone, everything. And the mental game at that level, generally, it's mostly mental at that level. The mechanics are so ingrained, they really don't need a lot of instruction. All they need is a maintenance program. But on the mental side, there's so much room right and left that they can improve upon, that a therapist or a sports performance consultant like myself is probably with them. I mean, on call all the time, just like I am. I'm on call with several athletes at all times.
Well, let's go ahead and kind of get into some of the different scenarios and things that a sports psychologist can help pickleball players with. So, mental blocks can be a real challenge for pickleball players, especially when it comes to certain shots like a serve and a return. Can you provide some maybe just insights into what's happening when somebody kind of gets that mental block, as well as maybe something that they can do to overcome it?
So I work with a lot of, believe it or not, I mean, this is an odd thing with my practice, which I did not account on, but I work with a lot of young female gymnasts and cheer squad girls. And believe me, when I went into this industry, I thought I'd be working with football players and golfers. And I mean, I have a lot of clients who are teenage girls. And it is the oddest thing for me to be working in a group of, 6 to 10, 13 or 14-year-old girls, but you got to go where the business is. And so I've spent a lot of time in gymnasiums and places where girls go to work on their gymnastics, and also in the cheer squad. And so what happens is that, let's say there's a particular difficult move, a backflip or a toe tuck touch or something like that, that this girl has to do in order to make the cheer squad. So in practice in the gym, she's doing knock it out. If she's by herself or with her coach or her parents or whatever, she can do it. All of a sudden, when she gets into the gym with all the other girls, then she falls apart. She can't do it. And so I simply analyze, like, what is going on? You can do it in one environment and you can't do it in the other environment. So then the parents say, well, she has a mental block. It's not a block. The word block is not really accurately describing this phenomenon. It's not a block. So what it is, in all of these cases, not just one or two cases, in all of these cases, is that the girl then she is thinking about not becoming embarrassed. All right. So at that age, at a teenage girl, she's focused on not becoming embarrassed. All right. I say at that age simply because if she was younger, let's say she's 8 years old, now she's worried about letting her parents down. So as the young people, they get older, they're trying to form their self-identity, then they're focused more internally about themselves. They don't want to embarrass themselves. And then as a player gets older, they could care less what the parents think. Then this about, I don't want to lose my house, or I don't want to lose the thing, my income coming in. But at this particular age now, they are focused on everything that is in the external environment. What does that mean? Well, there's the parents, there's the coaches, there's my competitors, there's some people that are standing in the stands, and then they're focused on what could happen. What could happen that could embarrass them. So that's what they're focused on. So then they're focused on something that could happen that could embarrass them, that is always negative. It's always the thing that they're trying to avoid, hence the term avoidance behavior. So it doesn't happen in practice, because there are seemingly no consequences, right? It doesn't matter. But now in this environment, in this particular environment, because of all the external factors, then all of a sudden there are focused now on the what ifs, instead of the how do I, which is what they were doing in practice. So therefore, I would think that the number one variable here, the number one factor in this so-called mental block, is focusing on not what if, which is future or outcome thinking, is to focus on this is, how, or this is what I got to do. And that's called process thinking. So therefore, that is the difference between outcome thinking and process thinking. One is focused on the what if, and generally that's always negative. In this case, the so-called mental block, as opposed to how am I going to do it, or how did I do it in practice? So that right there is, I think, a pretty good definition of what is a mental block and how and why does it happen and how do I overcome it. I believe I've done this now. I don't know how many times I have, experienced this, but not only in the cheer squad, but it happens, I think, generally in pretty much every sport. I only say the cheer squad because it has been so blatant right here. The evidence is so blatant simply because the feedback of the client. The young girl is telling me, well, I was afraid of, looking terrible or whatever, and they get so worked up. Many of these girls they don't have emotional regulation yet because they're
Hmm.
13, 14. So they'll start crying. I mean, it is a very, very emotional thing here. And so there ain't no getting out of them. I mean, you can tell them, oh, honey, it's fine. It is not fine. And I
Hmm.
never placate my clients like that anyway. I just let them get upset for a couple minutes. And then once they get their composure, then we talk about it. And then I give them the tools to be able to overcome it, in the future. And inevitably they do. Once they understand a thing, and then they can use their rationale to overcome a thing, then they're fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in general terms now, I'm just whitewashing this thing, really broad brushing it. But in general terms, that's where it comes from.
Yeah, and I think one thing that one word that you mentioned often there was thinking. And I think that's exactly why these type of things tend to happen on a shot, specifically like a serve and return. It's really the one part of the game where you have time to actually think about it. It seems like something where you should actually, especially on the serve, you have kind of full control over it. But as you mentioned, that there's also just more opportunity to overanalyze and overthink. Um, but I think it's really important for people to understand where that comes from and the clarity on it not being a mental block, but more along the lines of kind of what you just discussed right there.
Mhm.
Well, another thing that you mentioned was kind of talking about maintaining focus. And in a game like pickleball, games can go by really quickly. So if you lose focus even for a couple of points, what was maybe once a close score at 5-3, if you lose focus for a couple of points, all of a sudden the score can be 8-3, and you've really kind of put yourself in a hole. What are some things that players can do to kind of help them maintain focus so they avoid situations like that?
Okay, so let's say in the game of golf, right? In between shots, there could be several minutes in between shots. So pickleball, I believe, is not the distance between shots is not as long, but there is some distance mentally in between shots. So a normal round of golf 4 or 5 hours, and so I believe that it is impossible to focus on something for that long. I believe that's impossible. So
Hmm.
when people try to do it, I have documented many times that they'll run out of cognitive horsepower at around 13th, 14th hole. Then they report now on 15, 16, 17, 18, they're exhausted. So one of the things I would recommend for a pickleball player, tennis player, certainly on golf, is that it's like a light switch, a dimmer switch. So you focus on what is it that you need to focus on. You have identified what you need to focus on the upcoming shot. All right, you've identified that. And then you turn down the light switch, just let it go. And then you focus on what I call the price of a paperclip, which is, it's an analogy of nothingness, something that doesn't spool up the client at all, right? The athlete at all. In other words, you're not thinking about music that is very emotional or anything. It's just like, what am I have for lunch or something? Anything that's neutral in nature. Then when you approach the shot, then you turn up the dimmer switch to focus on, what is happening in my situation here? What's happening here? And so then you can preserve some of your mental horsepower until the end of the match. Now, let's say then there's not a lot of time to in between shots. They pick a ball, there may not be a lot of time.
Yeah,
Right.
there's about the 10 seconds between points. And I think that's where it's hard. It's like, okay, if you should be able to maintain focus maybe throughout the game, but if you lose it, that game can get out of hand very quickly because there is such a short window between points.
Well, let's say then that you've got 10 seconds in between shots, and that wouldn't make any sense to turn up and turn down, wouldn't make any sense. As far as that's concerned, you would turn it down when there are large stretches of time, 45 seconds, or you got a break, you just simply turn it off and think about anything else. But let's say there was 10 seconds and you have lost your focus. So you've only got a few seconds to figure out what happened. Why did I lose focus? Okay, so let's go down the rabbit hole a little bit. What is focus? What is focus? Okay, focus is a mental process that you are thinking specifically of a particular thing or an item. you are focused on this. I am literally focused on answering this question. If somebody came to the door right now, knocking on the door, I would lose my focus.
Mm-hmm.
So then how am I going to get back to this right here? You see, what am I going to do to get back to this? So either I'm going to have to interrupt this interview and say, okay, Ryan, I'll be right back. And then I'm going to put that aside and then I'll go focus on that and I'll come back. Or I'm going to take 5 seconds, let's say, and say to myself, I'm going to ignore that no matter what happens. And then I am going to get back to this conversation. So the brain seemingly now cannot focus on 2 things at the same time. I know there have been people that have said that I can focus on a number of things at the same time, but I'm not so sure that's even possible. I think that may be impossible. I mean, you can have several things on your mind at once, of course, but to absolutely focus and concentrate on one thing, I believe is the limit. I think now, I'm fairly sure on something that is something that is urgent in the person's life. So therefore, let's say that happens, like you're, focused on something, and then an event happens that now you have lost focus on your second serve or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So then the answer or an answer to that is to identify what happened in this short period of time to pop me out of my zone here. What happened? More than likely, it's going to be a distraction, or it's going to be a what if question, or I wish I had a statement, looking forward or looking backwards. What if I don't do this, then this is going to happen. You're focused on an outcome, or I wish I had not, right? Now you're looking backwards. So the first thing would be to identify that's where your mind is moving. That'd be the first thing. And then you then get back into, this is what I got to do. So the first thing would be the awareness, right? That would be the awareness. Then the second thing would be to get back to the place where you need to be, which is the present, the absolute present. I call it 6 inches in front of your nose. So again, first thing is awareness. The second thing is execution.
Yeah, and I think that oftentimes when players do kind of throw away a couple of points, it's like they would have missed a return, and then they're thinking and processing, well, what did I do wrong in that return? Maybe instead of shifting their focus back onto what needs to happen on that next upcoming shot. And that sounds like that might be a little bit in line with what you're talking about.
Many golfers have a real long memory. They cannot let it go on a shot that was just behind them, and they'll bring that baggage up to the next shot. And there's a lot of reasons why, they're disappointed, expectations, perfectionism, you name it. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why, but all reasons are valid, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the reason is. It's that if you're not focused on this shot, then you're focused somewhere else. And if you're somewhere else, then you have increased the probability of failure. Right? And so therefore, it's an old adage. I hate adages, but it is true that you got to stay in the moment. And that's how it's done, you see. And so when you hear professional athletes, certainly golfers all the time, well, I just hit one shot at a time. That's what they're saying, but they've been coached to say that. They don't say it just because they have read it in a textbook. Somebody has coached them up. And that's the reason why, is that focusing on the here and now is the best way to execute a successful shot. And then focusing on what I should have done and, what I hope doesn't happen. That's a great way to plow one right into the net or out of the back court, you see.
Exactly. Well, there are definitely moments, like high pressure moments that happen in pickleball. Like, a scenario would be, you're down 9-10, you're serving, you're on your second serve. And I hear players talk about, well, this is a must-win point, because if we don't win this point, now the serve's going to go back to the other side, and now they're serving on game point. What advice can you offer to pickleball players to kind of help them stay composed and maintain their composure when the pressure is on? And maybe that must-win mentality is one of the things that we shouldn't really be saying.
It's so common in every sport. It's the adage of choke, and I absolutely hate that word, because if you get in a situation where an athlete does choke, that means they have gotten to a point where people that call people chokers have never been. So I don't like using the word, but that is the word that is
Hmm.
associated with that kind of activity, is that they choke there at the end. And so then what happens when an athlete chokes? What somatically, physically, what happens to the athlete? So again, the athlete gets down to a situation. All right. The situation then in this particular case is where they have got to have a free throw to win the game. They have got to have a serve to win the game, putt to win the game. They got to have it, because then it's a do or die situation. Either you make it to win, you miss it and to lose. So then the scenario has been framed in that way for the athlete. It is framed in that way. Framed in what way? That is a, yes or no. There is no in the middle there. You make it, you win, you lose, or you miss it and you lose. So therefore, say a person other than, let's say, like Roger Federer, somebody like that, a professional athlete, they don't think in those terms. They don't. They recognize that situation.
Hmm.
They recognize that, yes, if I make this, we'll win. If I lose, if I don't, we'll lose. They recognize that, not living in denial here. But then that's as far as it goes. You see, their mindset is, it stops right there. In other words, they know what's going on. They're aware, of what's happening around them. But they're not going to react the way a non-trained person would react. Well, how would the non-trained person react? They're going to get nervous, and they're going to get, oh my, this is it. This is it. So then in the mind now, outwardly, they're cool, just, I got it under control. Internally, though, it's a firestorm inside. So then what happens? Well, then what could happen, and what generally happens, is that the athlete has spooled up now anxiety. They're worried. And so the worry then can tap into the subconscious mind, the fear response, fight or flight. It could tap into that. When that happens, all of a sudden, boom, you have chemical release in the body, cortisone, norepinephrine, adrenaline. If that happens, there's nothing to be done now. It's over now. But what happens if that were to happen? Then the body has a somatic reaction to stress. And that is the fight or flight syndrome. And then that's when the muscles then become tense and tight, because you're getting ready to get out of there, run away from a saber-toothed tiger or something, And so therefore, it would be too late at that point, because when your muscles are tense and tight, you have lost the freedom of motion. You've lost that freedom. Automaticity is gone. So then let's say, you haven't engaged it just yet. You haven't engaged it. Again, the first thing would be to reframe it in your mind as like, I understand what this is all about. However, what I'm going to do is, and then you fill in the blanks right there. So you're having a conversation with yourself. You see, yes, this is it. However, so everything, however, that's what's the most important stuff right there. You acknowledge, and then you move into your pre-shot routine. What is that? That's what you do before every shot, and you keep breathing deep, maintaining your focus the best you can, and keep breathing deep and focus on what you need to do, as opposed to focusing on what if, outcome thinking. So this whole notion of the choke it comes when an athlete focuses on something that they're trying to avoid or something that could happen. You know, Greg Norman, if you recall, he's been accused of choking many times, certainly at the Masters in '86, and I think it was also in '96. And part of the reason, I think, was that he had said that the Masters was the one tournament that he's always wanted to win. This man has won over 80 events worldwide. You would think that, you know, he knows how to win, but in this tournament, he placed it on a pedestal. See, it's important. It's a big deal. So therefore, it got framed in his mind that, you know what, this is a big deal. So therefore, if you can kind of frame it in your mind, like, you know, this is just another shot, and I'm going to treat it just like another shot, then it won't, you know, the chances of you not engaging the fight or flight are a lot better than if you were to say, man, I am like 3 shots away from slipping on that green jacket. And that's something I've been dreaming about my entire life. Wow. I mean, that kind of statement can cause a lot of anxiety, you know, a lot of anxiety, both good and bad. And anxiety is, unless you're an offensive lineman for the University of Alabama, you don't want that. And so therefore, the recognition, acknowledgement, and then focusing on your breathing and your relaxation, and then the reframe, 1, 2, 3, and you more than likely you're going to be fine.
Well, and you've kind of referenced golf. I know that you have a lot of experience working with golf players, competitive, professional level, and I know that one strategy that they'll often use is visualization. But in golf, they have kind of a little bit of time to kind of think about those situations and be able to draw it up. In a sport like pickleball, it may be aside from the serve where you have complete control. Is there any value in visualization, like even on because it's so reactionary, like a return or any other type of shot outside of the serve?
So visualization is I have a system that I use for my golfers. It's called the puzzle. And the puzzle are different mental aspects of their game that I want them to utilize before a shot or during the shot. Visualization is the cornerstone, along with self-talk. Self-talk and visualization are the 2 cornerstones of the puzzle. And so, interestingly, there's a little bit of science involved with this. So the question then becomes, why would I use visualization? Well, then the answer would be you would only use it if you were already an expert in your field. Okay, you only use that at that time. Why is that? Because you're not in the developmental stages. If you're in the developmental stages, you are literally thinking about, you know, the backswing, the forehand, or whatever. You are thinking about the mechanics. In other words, you have not moved into procedural memory, right? You haven't moved there yet. It's not in the subconscious mind. It's not in long-term memory yet. Your game is not there yet. But let's say your game is there. You're an expert. You don't have to continually work on your backhand, your forehand. I mean, you may tweak it a little bit, but you know, you're there. It is in procedural memory. You do not have to think about it. Okay. So let's say you're there. You are an expert player. Your game is in procedural memory. So if you're thinking about the mechanics, you're only getting in the way of the procedural memory. It's like trying to ride a bicycle. If you said right foot down, left foot down, right foot down, I mean, you would be in the curb. You see, you don't have to do that. But some people are perfectionists, you know, and they're always thinking about the mechanics. And so then now, if you can get to a place where you can trust yourself enough that you don't have to think about the mechanics, you use visualization. Because visualization doesn't come with any words, it's imagery. And that is the language of the subconscious mind, the dream state, you know, the image of the shot. And I'm going to tell you something, it is a very powerful tool, because if you can state what you want before the shot, you state what you want before the shot. This is what I want, so I'm going to do it. and then you can imagine it in your mind. You see the ball going in a certain spot. More than likely, subconscious mind is going to deliver on that. Yeah, you have turned it over now into a trust state. And I'm going to tell you something. The players I have worked with on the mini tours, that is the bridge of trust they cannot cross. They don't trust themselves enough to hit the shot that they can do 1,000 times in practice. But when it comes down to it, this so-called, moment here, they don't trust it because of the fundamentals of fear. They are focused on what is at stake instead of focusing on the execution of the shot. So visualization takes in place of the words, and that is the language of the subconscious mind. And if you can get to that spot, you're closer and closer to the zone. You're closer to the zone. There are no words in the zone. The zone is all feel and imagery. But the irony of the zone is that you try to get in the zone. That is exactly how to stay out of the zone.
Yeah, well, I could see where that type of technique would have benefit for the serve specifically, where you can kind of have more time to kind of draw it up in your mind. Because I see a lot of people when they struggle with the serve, they are focused a lot on the mechanics and not so much on the actual execution of what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah. So one caveat on this, and I have sort of struggled with this question myself, in that visualization in a basketball game. I mean, are you suggesting then that you cannot visualize the shot when you are, trying to move off a defender? That's a good question. And so, I mean, we're talking about in a matter of seconds here, right? And there's no time for a great player doesn't think in mechanics when they're going down the court. They're really not thinking mechanics. They're thinking about strategy. So, but then they're getting ready, they're moving into position. And now, are you saying that they can actually visualize the ball going into the basket? The answer, they could, if they had enough time. We are literally talking in seconds here. So I have kind of been back and forth on this, like, is there enough time to actually draw this picture in their mind? And I think sometimes they do. But in a game that's moving that quickly, the answer is probably no. They are just at a blank. They're just blank here. They don't have time to draw it up in their mind and see the ball going in. Now on the free throw line, yeah, you got time. So it seems like, from my experience talking with the players I work with, if they got time to visualize, they can visualize, and it works. If they don't have time, the thing is moving so dynamically, they don't have time, then there's nothing there. There's no time to visualize. So there's a kind of a debate in that for visualization.
Yeah, well, and I think in a sport like pickleball, where there's a lot of very fast, quick reactions, you can't necessarily anticipate what shot's coming next. But is there benefit, like in just say we're kind of doing kind of reviewing a dinking shot, where it's kind of one of these short shots that you hit into the kitchen. You can't necessarily predict where that shot's going to come from, but if that's a shot that you've struggled with, like, is visualization only effective kind of in that immediate moment?
You're saying they got time to practice it? Is that what you're saying?
Like, it's a shot that comes up routinely throughout a game, but is visualization only important, like, or only effective if I visualize it and then I go immediately into that shot? Like, if it's
Right. Well, there's the debate, you see.
yeah.
That you say, do I have time to do it? My thought is that I mentioned this bridge of trust. And so my thinking is, like, if I can work in practice to deliver an effective counter shot, all right, let's say I am working in practice on this particular shot that I know is going to come, 4 or 5 times in a match. Therefore, once it moves over into long-term memory, okay, it is now in procedural memory. Now I ain't got to think about it no more. Now, how long does that take? I mean, more than likely months, to get there. unless you're working on it every single day. And who's, only a professional athlete has time to work on something every day. But let's say that I am working on a particular move that is a counter move to something that I'm going to, work on. Yes, the visualization at that time would work. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That time in between working on it. But then in the match, you may not have time. But then if it has crossed over the bridge of trust into the subconscious, into procedural memory, you would not have to visualize it because it's already now have been habitualized.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully that makes sense. So there seems to be a common variable in time versus visualization. Do I have time to visualize? And if I do, then I would say I would do that. If I don't have time, hopefully you can do it in practice when you could have time to, practice this counter move. And then hopefully it'll move into subconscious mind, long-term memory. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, that definitely brings a lot of clarity to that. Well, one other thing that you mentioned a couple of times is the transition from practice to tournament play. And as pickleball is growing, there's a lot more people that are starting to participate in tournaments. And one thing that I will hear people talk about is how, well, when they played in their first tournament, their game completely fell apart. What are some things that players can do maybe in practice to work on some more of those game type of scenarios that can have them better carry over kind of into that tournament play?
It's a thing I call situational anxiety. All right. And I touched on it a little bit. And so a professional athlete, when they are in practice, for the most part, they take practice serious. Unless you're Allen Iverson, practice. But in today, most professional athletes, football players, hockey players, you name it, golfers certainly on the PGA Tour, practice is something that I'm not just going to kick it around, just kick it around. They don't do that. And why is that? Because of the competition. That's why there's a lot of money at stake here. So these guys treat practice almost as serious as they're treating a tournament. Why is that? Well, there are a number of reasons, but primarily because of this thing that me and you are talking about, situational anxiety. So therefore, in practice, if you treat practice like a tournament where there may be consequences, there's a technique right there. I mean, if you lose in practice, you owe the ball boy $5. There's a consequence here, something. And so therefore the subconscious mind then understands that there's a price to be paid here, a negative price to be paid if I don't do well in practice. There is a price to be paid. There are consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Consequence equates to pressure, if you want to call it that. So therefore, the more times that you can get in this situation that there are consequences of failure here, then the subconscious mind then is going to get acclimated to that environment. Going to get acclimated to that, and eventually will understand there is no difference between practice and a tournament. There's no difference here because I've been doing it for so long under duress, under stress. I put myself in stress for so long. Now I know how to handle it. As opposed to like not knowing what to do when you're in the last match here. Because now this is for everything. This is for the cup with my name on it. And, I'm going to get the t-shirt if I win and everything. So then, therefore, the player is thinking about the what ifs, and they haven't been under any duress or stress or anything, and they don't know how to handle it. But now all of a sudden, if you've been doing it 1,000 times, that's a literal statement. If you stress 1,000 times and you have, lost $150, $5 at a time, you know what? You're going to deal with it. You're going to deal with it unless you're complete neurotic and then you just can't deal with pressure or you have a continual, your life is nothing but anxiety, and we see that in today's world. People are complete neurotics, but people that are neurotics do not start for the New England Patriots. They can't
Mm-hmm.
in athletics, you see. So same thing in pickleball. A champion pickleball player more than likely is not a neurotic person, because a neurotic person is worried about the price of a paperclip.
Mm-hmm.
So a person that is a champion athlete more than likely is not a neurotic. They are somebody who can think rationally without a lot of emotions involved, and they're able to compartmentalize all of their fears into somewhere else. And so that's what I'd recommend, is make sure your practice is purposeful, and
Mm-hmm.
so that when you in a situation that you claim or think in your mind, this is it, you say, well, shit, I've been here. I lost $150, $5 at a time to the towel boy. It's a no, I got it.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly what's missing in most people's practice, is because we go out for pickup play. There's no shortage of games that's going on, so you can quickly lose one with your thought process is, well, I'm just going to hop right into the next one and I'll try to win the next one. And even when you're losing 8-2, it's very easy to just want to throw that game away, because you're already starting to think, well, I'm going to lose this game, so let's just go ahead and lose this one quickly so I can hop into the next one. But I think, as you kind of talked about,
that is the difference between a recreational player and a professional. And a professional
mm-hmm.
necessarily have to be somebody playing for money. It's somebody who is serious about winning. If a person is serious about winning, they want to win. They're competitive. They have a competitive nature. Then they're going to do that. Somebody who's recreational, it doesn't matter if they win or lose. They're not pickleball, golf, tennis, where it is not. It's a social vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
It's not for competition. It's for camaraderie, and that's great. I prefer if people do that instead of sitting at home, because
mm-hmm.
if outside, moving around, they'll have better health. If they better health, and they have more clarity in their mind. So if a person is a recreational player, then it doesn't matter. Self-talk, visualization, that has no relevance. Sports, like, I don't work with any recreational players. I only work with highly, highly competitive athletes, because they want to win. So if you have a pickleball player who could care less whether they win or lose, this conversation is moot, and it doesn't matter. But if you have somebody who is looking to win the club championship, or they have a goal of becoming the racket, the pickleball champion, I would tune in to Brian Lee in this for a while, to jot down everything that I have said, and perhaps even call me.
Yeah, I think just giving people all the resources that they can to kind of take their game to whatever level their goal is.
Level 3 sports, that's what.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah.
Well, I did have one question from a listener, and that is, pre-jitters is very common kind of when you're before a match. You kind of mentioned some of the fight or flight things. Are there things that you can do when you start to sense that coming on to kind of calm some of those nerves before heading out onto the court?
One of the most celebrated amateurs to ever play the game of golf was a man by the name of Bobby Jones. He created Augusta National, in fact, and it very common knowledge that he had pregame jitters. I mean, he would stated he got sick, physically sick, when he would get ready to go out onto the golf course. Why is that happening? Well, because the hormones are being released in your body. It gets in your stomach and it evacuates the things that are in your stomach. That's why. Fight or flight. Lighten up the load so you can get out of there. So then what can you do? There is real science out there. How long does this last? Some people say 20 minutes. Some people say 40 minutes, but the chemicals that are released in your body they dissipate over time. So he had time, the first hole in a golf match is 20 minutes long. So he had time to overcome that on the first hole. Just get me down the fairway and, let this go. So one of the keys I tell my athlete is if you feel this going to once it hits, there's nothing to be done.
Mm-hmm.
It's here and there's nothing to be done. But you got to continue to deep breathe real deep. And the reason being is because when the fight or flight hits, there's a phenomenon that can happen and called vasoconstriction.
Mm-hmm.
Blood vessels then tighten up, the blood moves into the middle of the body. Now that can happen. If that happens, deep breathing then forces the blood back out into your hands. And pickleball, tennis, golf, it's all in the hands. The field's in your hand. But when that flood of chemicals hits your body, your muscles get tense, and then the blood vessels constrict, vasoconstrict. So the deep breathing then forces the blood back out into your hands. And then if you rub your hands together, it creates friction, which creates heat, which moves the blood back into your hands as well. Shoulder rolls, stretching, everything that can keep your body flexible is the things that I tell my clients. Just keep moving, breathing, rubbing your hands together, you know what I mean? Stretching your fingers back out and forth. Make sure you keep the blood flowing in your small, big muscles, the whole thing, stretch the whole thing. The breathing then helps to dissipate the chemicals that have been, the hormones that have released into the body, but it's going to take some time to get fully. But while you are in that state of recovery, you can at least hold on to your game and not get seized up, you see, and not be, a victim of that, and not have, I'm just frozen. I don't know what to do. You know what to do. I've told you what to do. And if you can withstand it. And by that time they get to the second hole, you're fine, So that's what Bobby Jones said. By the time he got to the second and third hole, he was fine, which makes perfect sense. Pre-game jitters is a very common thing. Once you feel it hit, it's over. Clock. And now, I've given you the tools to be able to withstand it until it dissipates out of your blood system.
Great. Well, that's really helpful, and the science too of kind of what's happening to kind of cause that. I think it's very interesting. Well, Dr. Trammel, I really appreciate you coming on the episode today, and I know you shared a lot of valuable insights and tips that people will be able to implement to help improve their mental game on the court. If people were interested in working with you or finding more information that you have available, where can they find you? Website, social media?
Yeah, Level 3 Sports Psychology. And so the website is www.level3sports. The 3 is the number 3.com. And then I have an 800 number, 800-919-7506. But all you have to do is type in Dr. Richard Trammel on Google, and I'll be splashed up everywhere, or Level 3 Sports Psychology. And I'm everywhere. Literally, I am from coast to coast, essentially, because of when COVID happened. Before COVID, I had a territory of Birmingham, Atlanta, and Boca Raton. Every 6 weeks, I would just do a triangle visiting my clients. That's where I was. And March of 2020, that all changed. And so since then, now we do everything on Zoom, and I have clients literally from California to, Massachusetts. I go all over. I'm everywhere now. And interest is just, that's what, company had to change policy, and I did. And now I've got clients literally all over the place. So therefore, wherever you are, wherever you're hearing this podcast, everything I do is on Zoom, other than a caddy for some golf clients here in the Southeast and PGA Tour. If I go out to a PGA Tour event, I will go out on a practice round with my player. But generally, I am right here in my office. And then I work with people from 6 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock at night, all over the country.
Great. Well, that's really important, because I know that we have listeners all over the country, and a couple of international listeners as well. So yeah, definitely reach out to Dr. Trammel at Level 3 Sports Psychology. And thank you again, Dr. Trammel, for coming on. And thank you to our listeners for tuning into this episode, and be sure to join us next time. Until then, stay healthy, pickleballers.